John Drake stood at the edge of the observation platform, staring out over the sprawling landscape of Galvius. A planet more beautiful than anyone could have imagined, yet filled with a palpable tension, as if the very land beneath his feet was holding its breath. The air was thick with the scent of alien flora, something sweet, almost intoxicating, and the sky shimmered with hues that had no names in any human language. It was, without a doubt, a paradise. Or it had been. When humanity had arrived on Galvius, the excitement had been palpable. After decades of straining Earth's resources, they were finally on the brink of a new beginning. Colonization had begun with hope in the hearts of a desperate people, desperate for somewhere to expand, for some way to solve the looming crises back home. This was the future, but now, standing in the twilight glow of the alien world, Drake knew the future of humanity rested not in the colony's sprawling greenhouses or the gleaming spires of human settlements, but in the hands of those who had been here long before, the Villian, the species who, unbeknownst to humanity, had been the silent caretakers of the planet for eons. Do you think they'll really kill us? Myra's voice was low, and the question hung in the air like the mist that swirled beneath them. She had been Earth's top diplomat in the colony, just as Drake had once been, but even Mira, with all her training and calm exterior, was unsettled by the overwhelming presence of the Villian. Drake turned to look at her. Her face was as unreadable as always, but there was something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before, a spark of doubt. For the first time, he could see the weight of the mission in her posture, in the way her fingers gripped the railing a little too tightly. I don't know, Mira, Drake replied, his voice barely above a whisper. But we're about to find out. He turned back to face the horizon, watching the great, living forest of Galvius stretch far and wide. Every tree, every plant, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The Villian, the indigenous species of this world, had once lived in isolation, their bodies shifting and blending with the environment in ways that defied human understanding. They weren't creatures to be studied through a microscope, they were forces of nature themselves, and now, they had made their presence known, declaring the human settlement a violation of Galvius' delicate ecological balance. The Villian had delivered their message with the force of a thunderclap. The Earth and its people were a threat to the future of the planet. The humans were to face an ecological judgment. If they failed, Galvius would close its gates, and humanity would be barred from ever returning. Drake's communicator beeped, and he glanced down at the screen. It was a message from the Villian's emissaries, who had arrived in the city just hours earlier. Remember, the trial begins tomorrow. The first trial had been designed as a test of patience, something Drake had believed he could handle. He was a diplomat, after all, accustomed to endless negotiations and long hours spent in sterile, high-stakes meetings. But what the Villian had in mind was not something that could be addressed through words or strategies. The test of harmony, they had called it. When Drake and his team arrived at the designated location, it became immediately clear that this was no ordinary trial. They were led through a narrow path, flanked by towering trees that seemed to glow faintly in the twilight. The air buzzed with strange, almost melodic frequencies, and Drake felt a shiver run down his spine as the world seemed to hum in rhythm. Do you feel that? Mira asked, her voice barely audible. She looked shaken, though she kept her eyes forward, her posture straight. Drake nodded, though he wasn't sure if he could trust his senses. The environment itself seemed to be alive. No, more than that, it seemed to watch them. The trees bent and swayed, though there was no wind. Flowers bloomed and closed in time with their steps. The world was in perfect sync with their every movement. They reached a clearing. At its center stood a stone altar, ancient and worn, though untouched by time. Standing next to it was Shyll, the Villian emissary. Shyll's form shimmered in the twilight, appearing almost fluid, a mixture of light and shadow that refused to hold a solid shape. Drake had seen the Villian before on monitors, in holograms, but seeing them in person was something else entirely. There was a feeling of being near something other, something far beyond the realm of human understanding. You are the humans who have come to test the balance of this world, Shyll said, their voice like the wind itself, soft, but unmistakably authoritative. I will guide you through the first trial. You will face the forest. It is alive, and it will judge you." Drake looked at Mira, who gave him a single, determined nod. He stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Do you have any idea what that means?" he asked quietly, his voice tight. Mira shook her head. "Not a clue." Before Drake could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The air shifted, growing thick with an energy that seemed to press against his chest. The trees in the clearing shook violently, their limbs stretching toward the sky. A low hum filled the air, and the very earth beneath his feet seemed to sigh. A sound deep, rumbling, and somehow filled with wisdom reached Drake's ears. "Welcome," the forest seemed to say. "Test your place in this world." The trees parted, and a pathway opened before them, leading into the heart of the forest. A cold shiver ran down Drake's spine, but there was no turning back. He stepped forward, followed closely by Mira. The moment they entered the forest, the world changed. The path beneath their feet became soft, almost spongy, as though they were walking on living tissue. The air grew dense with the sweet scent of alien flora, and the hum of the planet's energy surrounded them. Drake felt his head spin, the lines between reality and illusion blurring. The colors of the trees shifted as they walked, casting strange shadows on the ground. He could feel his senses becoming overloaded. Every step, every breath, every movement was met with an overwhelming rush of stimuli. And then the voice came again, clearer this time, resonating through the very ground beneath his feet. "Balance. It is the law of this world. Seek harmony. Become one with the forest, or become dust." The words didn't make sense. How could he become one with the forest? He was human, a creature of logic, of progress, of control. He was not some alien life form that could live in symbiosis with the land. Was that what the villain wanted? Was it even possible? Mira turned to him, her face tight with determination. "We have to do this. We have no choice." Drake swallowed hard, steeling himself. They couldn't fail. They couldn't. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the forest. The trees closed in on either side, their gnarled branches seeming to reach for them. Drake's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. He had been trained for this, hadn't he? Years of diplomatic talks, years of resolving conflicts. This was just another negotiation, wasn't it? But then the ground beneath him gave way, and he tumbled forward into the earth, his vision spinning as he fell. Drake's mind scrambled to catch up with his senses as he fell, tumbling through the darkness, the world spinning around him. His arms flailed, grasping at thin air, but there was nothing solid to hold on to. The ground beneath him was soft, yet it gave way easily, as though the planet itself was swallowing him whole. He braced for impact, but it never came. Instead, as the falling sensation continued, he was suddenly still. His feet touched down with a light, cushioned step, and he looked around in confusion. The landscape before him was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a vast, undulating forest that stretched as far as the eye could see, its trees seemingly shifting in rhythm to an unheard melody. The world felt alive, and not just in the way the natural world does. It was as though the planet itself had a consciousness, an intelligence far beyond anything humanity had imagined. He tried to steady his breathing, his heart hammering in his chest. Mira, who had been right behind him, was now standing beside him, looking just as disoriented. There was no sign of the path they had been following, and the trees around them had grown dense, their trunks twisted into strange shapes that seemed to pulse with energy. The air was thick with an almost tangible hum. "Where are we?" Mira asked, her voice soft, almost reverent. Drake scanned the surroundings, feeling the weight of the question settle over him. "I don't know. But it's not like before." He could sense the difference now. Something was shifting, something that wasn't just physical. His every step felt as though he was walking deeper into a living organism, each footfall more weighted, more significant. There was no longer a boundary between them and the world around them. They were part of it, and it was part of them. The trees overhead creaked, their branches twisting and entwining like the veins of some enormous, organic creature. The humming intensified, vibrating through the ground and into his bones, until it seemed like the very planet itself was speaking to him. Do you understand? The voice came, not through the air, but in his mind, its resonance echoing deep inside his skull. It was impossible to tell if it was the villain speaking or the planet itself, but the feeling of being utterly known, of being scrutinized down to his very essence, was undeniable. He stiffened. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat, stifled by the overwhelming sense of connection. What do you want from us? The ground shifted beneath him, a soft ripple, and he realized the trees around him weren't just stationary, they were moving, subtly, shifting positions like the flow of a river. The forest was alive, breathing, responding to him. You seek to understand, the voice continued. To impose your will on this world, to bend it to your desires. But you cannot. You must learn to listen, to merge with the rhythm of life. The words echoed like a warning, but Drake didn't understand. His thoughts felt scattered, as if trying to piece together a puzzle whose pieces were just beyond his grasp. He glanced at Mira, whose face was pale, eyes wide. He could see her struggle to remain composed, but even she was failing to hide the fear. Merge with it? Mira asked aloud, her voice cracking. What does that even mean? To become one with the rhythm, the voice responded. To cease the struggle, the resistance. Drake clenched his fists, frustration creeping into his chest. You want us to what? To surrender? To stop trying to change things? The voice was silent for a moment, and when it spoke again, its tone had shifted, almost amused. You misunderstand, it said. It is not surrender. It is understanding. To accept that your efforts alone will never control this world. You are part of it, just as we are part of you. It is only by becoming that you will pass this trial. The ground rippled again, and the trees shifted closer, their enormous trunks surrounding them in a tight circle. The air grew thicker, more oppressive, as the sounds of the forest intensified. Birds, no, creatures that were neither birds nor anything Drake had ever seen, sang in low, mournful tones, and the whisper of the wind through the leaves sounded almost like a symphony. How do we become part of it? Drake asked, his voice desperate now. He felt the pressure of the situation, the overwhelming weight of the trial pressing down on him. He wasn't even sure what to do next, what direction to take, but one thing was certain: they were being tested, not just by the villain, but by the very world itself. Do not resist. The voice was no longer just in his head, it filled the air around him, reverberating in every part of his body. Feel the pulse. Become the pulse. Suddenly, everything became very still. The air was thick, the ground beneath his feet seemed to hum with life, and Drake felt something he had never felt before. A connection. He reached down, his hand trembling as he touched the soft soil beneath him, and for a brief moment, it was as though he could hear the planet's heartbeat, feel its rhythm. The trees swayed gently, almost like they were breathing in time with his own heartbeat. The sensation was both unnerving and exhilarating, as though the forest was extending an invitation, one that required complete submission, complete trust. Drake closed his eyes, trying to quiet the noise in his mind. The planet was alive, not just as a series of living organisms, but as a sentient entity. He understood that now, on some deep, primal level. It wasn't just a place to colonize. It wasn't just a resource to be exploited. It was a partner, a living partner in a vast, intricate dance of life. How do we stop this? Myra's voice shattered his concentration, raw with panic. How do we make it stop? Drake opened his eyes and turned to her. She was shaking, her eyes wide with fear. He could see the terror in her face, the pressure of the trial weighing down on her just as it was on him. Stay with me, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside. We have to listen. We have to understand. He looked down at the ground again, as if searching for something. We're part of this, Mira. All of us. The forest, the animals, the villain, they're not enemies. They're part of the same system. For a moment, Mira just stared at him, confusion clouding her expression. Then, she looked down at the soil beneath her feet, and something seemed to shift within her. "You think this will save us?" she whispered. "I don't know," Drake admitted, a pang of doubt striking him, but he didn't let it show. "But we have to try." The trees around them shuddered, their branches bending inward, and suddenly, the ground beneath their feet cracked open, revealing a deep, dark chasm. The air grew cold, and the hum that had been present in the atmosphere intensified, vibrating through the very core of the planet. It was as if the planet itself was calling them, beckoning them into the chasm. "Do you hear that?" Mira asked, her voice barely audible, her eyes wide. "I hear it," Drake said, his throat dry. "We have to go." He reached out, pulling her along with him. Together, they moved toward the chasm, the trees parting before them as though granting them passage. The ground seemed to shift under their feet, and for a moment, Drake felt himself slipping into the abyss, but then nothing that he wasn't falling. He was floating, the world around them blurred, and for a fleeting moment, Drake lost all sense of time. The forest, the planet, the Villian, all of it faded away. It was just him and Mira, suspended in a void, the pulse of Galvius reverberating through his body, syncing with his heart. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. Drake opened his eyes that he was no longer standing in the forest, but on solid ground again. The hum was gone. The chasm was gone. The trees, once pulsing with life, now stood silent, still, as though the trial had never happened. Mira blinked, looking around. What happened? Drake took a deep breath, his head spinning. He wasn't sure what had just occurred. Had they passed the test? Had they failed? But the one thing he knew for certain was that the trial was not over. They had just taken the first step. The landscape before them was unchanged, but everything felt different. The air was still, no longer humming with the pressure that had enveloped them earlier. The trees stood motionless, as if they were watching. It was almost too quiet, as if the planet had decided to hold its breath, waiting for something. Drake could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him. They had just experienced something profound, but he couldn't quite articulate what that was. Was it a victory? Or had they simply survived another test? Mira was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. What the hell was that? Drake looked at her, his mind racing. He couldn't explain it, not in a way that would make sense to her, or even to himself. What had happened wasn't something that could be broken down into simple terms or logical conclusions. He had felt the pulse of the planet, the rhythm of the world, and for a moment, he had felt as if he was part of it. But now, it was like all of it had slipped through his fingers, like a dream fading upon waking. "I don't know," he said slowly. "But I think we just had to let go. Let go of everything we thought we knew." The words felt strange as he spoke them, as if he was merely echoing a truth that had been told to him, not one he had truly understood. But as soon as the words left his mouth, a realization flickered in the back of his mind. Was it possible? Could it really be that simple? Mira shook her head, still clearly unsettled by what had just transpired. Let go of everything we thought we knew? She laughed, though there was little humor in it. That's the answer? You've got to be kidding me. We're supposed to just be with this place, this alien world? And that's going to solve everything? Drake looked at her, and for the first time since arriving on Galvius, he felt the distance between them. She was human, just like him. She was trained to fight, to negotiate, to win. But what he was beginning to understand, what the planet was beginning to teach him, was that there was no winning here. Not in the way they had always thought. There was only balance. And right now, that balance was tipping, and they had no idea how to restore it. "We don't have a choice," he said quietly, his voice tinged with an unfamiliar certainty. "This is how we survive. How we move forward. We have to understand this place on its terms, not ours." Mira stared at him, her expression unreadable, before she turned away and began walking, her boots crunching softly on the forest floor. I don't know if I can buy into that. Not yet. Drake's heart sank. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to be at odds with the only person who understood what was at stake. But the realization was hitting him, clearer than before, the only way out was through. And if they couldn't find a way to be with Galvius, to become part of the world itself, then they would never get what they needed from the villain. They would never be able to prove humanity's worth to this planet, and that would mean the end of their dreams of colonization. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable, but eventually, Mira stopped walking. She didn't turn around, but her shoulders slumped. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, almost resigned. You really think they'll listen? She asked. That the villain will buy into this harmony nonsense? They think we're a threat. They think we're gonna destroy this world just by existing. You really think they'll change their minds after all this? Drake exhaled slowly, thinking about her words. Mira was right. The villain had made their position clear. Humanity was an invader, a virus spreading across the cosmos, threatening the delicate balance of the universe. They didn't care about diplomacy, about compromise. They saw only the destructive force of Earth's history and assumed that humanity would bring the same chaos to Galvius. He glanced at the towering trees around them, feeling the pulse of the planet beneath his feet. The voice from the forest, the pulse they had felt, was still with him, reverberating deep in his bones. Maybe the villain would never understand. Maybe they would never accept humans as part of the balance, but he had to try. I don't know, he said finally, his voice steady, but tinged with uncertainty. But we have to be part of this world first. If we can't find a way to live here, to coexist with it, we'll never make it out. He wasn't sure whether he was convincing her or himself, but it was the only truth he could hold on to right now. Galvius wasn't just a place to colonize. It was something far deeper, far more complex than anything Earth had ever encountered. And if humanity wanted to survive here, they had to accept that. The next few moments were heavy with the weight of their thoughts, until, finally, Mira nodded, though it was clear she still had doubts. Okay, she said. But don't expect me to start singing the praises of this place. Not yet. Drake chuckled, though it was a strained sound. We'll take it one step at a time. They walked on in silence, deeper into the heart of the forest, both of them uncertain about what the next trial would bring. But neither of them spoke the thought that lingered just beneath the surface. Would the villain understand what they were trying to do? Would they even care? The answer would come soon enough. The second trial was nothing like the first. No sudden falls, no deep chasms to cross, no overwhelming flood of sensory overload. This time, there was only stillness, a deep, suffocating silence. They had been led to a vast, open meadow, its grass shimmering with a golden light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. There was no sound. No movement. Only the endless expanse of tall, pale grasses swaying gently in a breeze that didn't exist. Shyll stood before them, still as ever, the faint shimmer of his alien form blending with the environment in a way that was almost impossible to grasp. His presence was both everywhere and nowhere, like a thought that hovered just beyond comprehension. The second trial, Shyll's voice said, resonating through the air without moving his lips, is a test of presence. A test of your ability to still your mind and spirit, to find the center of this world and rest there. Drake blinked, trying to make sense of the words. What does that even mean? Shyll didn't respond immediately, but the air around them seemed to tighten, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the alien being spoke again, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. You will find that nothing can be gained through force. Only through balance. Only by letting go of what you desire. Drake's stomach twisted. He didn't know what Shyll meant by that, but it didn't sound like something he could easily wrap his head around. Let go of desire? What did that even mean? They were on trial, their future hanging in the balance. Letting go of desire didn't feel like an option, but then again, maybe that was the point. He glanced at Mira, whose face was a mask of concentration. Her eyes narrowed as she absorbed Shyll's words. She wasn't going to make it easy. Neither of them were. Without another word, Shyll turned and began to walk into the meadow, disappearing into the tall grass. The ground beneath them shifted again, and Drake had the unsettling feeling that they were being watched not just by Shyll, but by the planet itself. He didn't know how to pass this trial. He didn't even know what it meant, but the world was waiting. End of story.